Welcome to Malifaux University. 409. Terrain, Impassable and Climbable. Malifaux is a rich, immersive experience with intricate models. When well-painted models are put on a well-decorated table, the game is even better. Terrain can be tricky, and it comes with many layers of rules that affect gameplay. This video covers Impassable and Climbable Terrain. Video 407 covers dense and concealing terrain. Video 408 addresses terrain with the destructible, severe, and hazardous characteristics. And Video 410 explains height and blocking and the shadow those traits create. This applies to terrain that is placed on the table during setup or markers that are created or dropped during gameplay that have these characteristics, and therefore are considered terrain. Before each game, your opponent and you must discuss the terrain on the playing area. A well-laid-out table will naturally have several pieces of impassable terrain to restrict free movement on the table. Models and markers cannot overlap impassable terrain at any time. Models with the incorporeal ability or a similar game effect that says they may ignore terrain when moving may move through impassable terrain during movement, like a walk or a push, but may not stop within the impassable terrain. Jackdaw, for instance, has the Ghost of Malifaux ability that lets him move through terrain. He could walk through the wall of this building, stopping inside the building as long as both players agreed before the game that models were allowed to enter the buildings through normal means like doors. If not, he could pass through it only if he had enough movement to completely traverse the impassable structure in one action. He would not be allowed to move into it and take another movement to get out of it, since his base would be overlapping the impassable terrain between the actions. Impassable markers behave the same way as terrain on the table, but a few more rules apply since they are markers. For starters, impassable markers can be the target of the Slam general action. Slam places the marker within an inch of the model taking the action, unless the marker is also destructible, in which case it removes it from the table. Impassable markers are never dropped, even if the text says so. They are always considered to be created. This means they can overlap other terrain as long as that terrain is not also impassable, but they cannot overlap any other marker. If Charles Hoffman, inventor, got the mask trigger on his bulldoze tactical action, he could create a new impassable pylon marker anywhere within 3 inches of him, but not here on this corpse marker or here on this ski marker. Created markers also cannot be put into base contact with any model other than the model creating them unless the game effect specifically says to do it. If another model were near Charles Hoffman, his new pylon marker would not be allowed to touch it when it was created. Euripides, on the other hand, has the Entomb in Ice ability that says he may create an impassable ice pillar marker in base contact with any model within 8 inches when it is killed. Because it specifically says into base contact, he gets to break the usual rule. These created markers still cannot overlap the base of any model, just be in base contact. We've said that impassable markers cannot overlap the bases of other models or markers. Naturally, the reverse is also true. Dropped objects or summoned models cannot overlap the base of impassable terrain or markers. If Charles Hoffman kills this wicked doll next to one of his impassable pylon markers, the scrap marker from the doll cannot be dropped so it is underneath the pylon marker. It may touch it, just not overlap it. If another model were to summon another wicked doll, it would not be allowed to overlap the base of the ice pillar marker or the pylon marker. If a game effect pushes or moves an impassable marker, treat it like a model. It cannot go through other impassable terrain or other models. Euripides' Glacial Shove tactical action can push an ice pillar marker up to 10 inches. If that marker hits this building or one of these models, the marker will stop just like it was a model that got its push interrupted. Of course, that then leads to the second part of the Glacial Shove action, which may be the intent. I'll take a brief moment now to thank all those who were patrons at the time this video was made, especially Griff, Sergey, Tom, Alan, Jeremy, Mikolai, and Travis, and many more at the free student tier. Your support is essential to bringing these videos to life. Climbable terrain allows models to move up and down its sides and across its top if the top is large enough to hold a model. This is most fences, walls, and crates. Most buildings are considered climbable, so models can get to their rooftops, but if a building is more than 4 inches tall, you should consider making it just impassable without it being climbable. Since models cannot stop on the sides of the buildings to take other actions, there is little point to having climbable terrain that a model cannot stand on top of. If a building is 3 inches tall but has a steep roof, just call the whole thing impassable. But that's between you and your opponent or the tournament organizer. Use a model's movement to go vertically along climbable terrain, but the model's base must be at least 50% supported by the terrain at the end of the movement, unless the model takes another walk action to get all the way up and supported. Let's say this enormous crate is a 3-inch cube and is both climbable and impassable. Lucas McCabe, Relic Hunter, is 5 inches away and has a movement stat of 7. He can move 5 inches to get into base contact with it, and then, defying all logic, may ride his horse the remaining 2 inches of his movement stat up the side of the crate. If he stops to do anything here, he will fall the 2 inches back to the surface of the playing area, suffering 1 damage. If he immediately takes another walk action, he can move the remaining 1 inch up the side of the crate, and then at least 1 inch over to get 50% of his base supported by the top of the crate. 2 inches over would put his 50mm base completely on top of the crate. The sides of the terrain are considered impassable, so models and other markers cannot move through the terrain or overlap its base. If a model ignores impassable terrain that is also climbable, the model may still move up and down the sides of the terrain as normal. This Lissa model has the incorporeal ability, which states it ignores terrain while moving. That means it can pass through the sides of impassable terrain as long as it doesn't stop within that terrain. It does not mean it gets to ignore the height of the climbable terrain. If the Lissa model wanted to chase Lucas McCabe up the giant crate, it would have to walk up the 3-inch side like most other models, but once it got on top, would still not be allowed to overlap McCabe's 50mm base. Models that can ignore the height of terrain while moving are those with the flight ability, since that ability turns walk or push movements into placements. Falling is the quickest way off climbable terrain for most models. It doesn't cost any movement and causes damage equal to half the fallen distance rounded down. This means there's no damage from a fall of less than 2 inches, 1 point of damage from 2 to 3 inches, and 2 points of damage from 4 or more inches. You might decide to use this on purpose if you can control the movement of enemy models, since death by falling damage does count as your model killing the target. You might also choose to fall if you need the movement range. Lucas McCabe, on top of this giant crate, needs to get down and get back in the action. If his base is already at the edge of the crate, it takes him 2 inches to get his 50mm base completely off of it, and then it would be 3 inches of movement to get safely back to the table, leaving only 2 inches of his 7-inch movement remaining. Alternatively, he could choose to walk 1 inch to get his base unsupported by the crate, fall the entire 3 inches, taking 1 point of damage, and then resume his movement with 6 inches remaining. If he doesn't want the damage but needs as much movement as he can get, he could walk the 2 inches to get his base all the way off the crate, walk half the distance down, and then fall the remaining 1.5 inches, taking no damage, and then having 3.5 inches of movement remaining. Keep in mind that when the model falls, it must land so it is not overlapping another model or impassable terrain, using more of its movement to do so if necessary. This is the only situation where you get to fall forward, since falling is normally straight down, but this is also the only way you can kind of jump over impassable terrain or models in your way. It's later in the game, and Lucas McCabe, Relic Hunter, has been killed and replaced by Lucas McCabe, Dismounted Hunter, on a 30mm base. He's still on top of the 3-inch crate, now seen from above, and Euripides has lined up 3 30mm Cultgeist models along the side of the crate. McCabe cannot walk through them, so cannot simply climb down that side of the crate. What he could do, though, is walk 3/4 inch so his base isn't adequately supported by the crate, adding another 1.25 inches to his horizontal movement to get beyond the Cultgeist's bases, and then fall the 3 inches down. When he hits the ground, he takes 1 point of damage from the fall and is now engaged by the Cultgeists. They have a 1-inch engagement range, so he could move a little farther away as long as he doesn't break that engagement. If a model does not have enough movement to get past whatever is blocking its fall, then the whole movement stops with 50% of the model's base still on the original terrain, and the fall just doesn't happen. Let's say Lucas McCabe, Dismounted Hunter, is on the crate still, but with the staggered condition that reduces his movement from 5 to 3. He walks 2 inches to get to the edge of the crate, but he needs to walk 3/4 inch to get his base far enough off to fall, and then he still needs another 1 1/4 inches to fall past the Cultgeists. Altogether, that's 4 inches of movement he doesn't have. If he wants to make the walk, the model would stop with half its base still on the crate. A second walk action could then start the fall, then the 1 1/4 inches to fall past the Cultgeists, taking 1 damage. That's the overview of terrain with the impassable and climbable characteristics. Pick up a printable set of all the markers and tokens you need to play Malifaux in the Wargame Vault. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new content. And be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games, keep it simple, and have fun.